So I just want to provide a brief overview of how the vaccine rollout was initiated. In the very beginning, when the vaccines were getting ready to be distributed across the nation, the government looked at tribes as their own separate entity and not part of a state. So with that, IHS took responsibility for the tribes. Then they reached out to the tribal healthcare systems and asked if we wanted to enter into an agreement with IHS to get the vaccine through IHS, or if we wanted to opt out and go through the state. Here on Navajo Nation, 17 of the healthcare systems agreed to sign on with IHS. Once we entered an agreement with IHS that we were going to be getting the vaccines, we provided them population numbers of the population that we serve within our service unit. IHS then took those numbers and created a fair way to distribute the vaccines down to the different healthcare facilities. So in the very beginning, the Navajo Nation was getting a little over 6,000 vaccines distributed for all of Navajo Nation. When Navajo Area Office gets those vaccines, then they split that up to the different service areas based off of the population or based off of how many people have been vaccinated. And we were very fortunate enough about 3 weeks ago that the government said we have a big surplus of Moderna vaccine. So then the Navajo Nation was able to obtain about 28,000 vaccines in a week. And then that's the reason why we saw a lot of those weekend blitzes and the phase approach being basically overstepped, so that way we could try to get as many of those vaccines out within 10 days.
Just to emphasize to everyone that a systematic approach was taken. We considered all the population, the at-risk groups, really mirroring what the Navajo Nation and Indian Health Services provided us to move forward with the rollout of the vaccine to all these populations. I think one of our priorities had always been trying to vaccinate the most vulnerable. So really targeting those specific populations, which would be the ones who have chronic health diseases, those ages over 65 plus. So when you look back at our vaccine rollout, there are specific identified populations that we did capture, and we have those data to reflect that. So I think we're sitting really well within our own service area that we're providing coverage.
So far to date, we have vaccinated roughly 48% of the population that are in the Fort Defiance Service Unit. That number is based off of first doses. The second doses that have been administered is obviously going to be a little bit farther because there's a 21 or 28 day lag time. So I don't have an accurate count of how many second doses have been given, but to date we have about 48% of the population.
Overall, we are trying to acquire community immunity, also known as herd immunity, at 75%. So when we're looking at each of the percentages that Jarom had mentioned earlier, Dominic Clichy takes a look at each of the communities and evaluates and determines what their percentage level is.
What Leah had mentioned is we're looking at those percentages. So then Dominic has been able to break it down per chapter and the population that each chapter serves based off of a census. We'll look at those chapters, and if we see a chapter that is lagging behind the rest of them as far as they have a lower percentage, then we're going to look at taking a more strategic approach and trying to send out either the mobile health unit or the PHNs out there to host some type of event to try to get those percentages up higher. So then that way we're not just leaving one community, that we're all going to be pretty equal across the board. In regards to that percentage and the data, we've held several of the mass vaccination events. In the very beginning, they were well accepted. We had a huge turnout from the population. And like Leah had mentioned earlier, we focused on the highest vulnerable people. So we did high-risk patients. Those patients were people that were impaneled. So they were called and appointments were made. Then we did a mass vaccination event for the 75 and over population. That one was well received, and then we dropped it down to the 65 and over. Then we had one that was for 55 and over. And then even the recent one where we just opened it up to anybody over 18. we started seeing a trend towards the last 3 events where in the very beginning, there's a lot of people, but towards the end of it, it starts to trickle down. That's why we started looking at the data a little bit closer, and it's amazing that we've had vaccinated over 11,000 people so far within our service unit. So we're getting a big group of people already done, and that's probably one of the reasons why we're seeing the numbers down. We know that there might be a handful of like 75 and over high-risk patients out there that may not have been vaccinated. We have a way of tracking those and trying to get those people taken care of if they have it. However, those big mass vaccination events that we held really got a big chunk of those populations out of the way. Now we're taking a step back and thinking of a more controlled, appointment-based approach. The vaccine isn't mandatory. This is really a volunteer basis. If people want to get the vaccine, they'll come to our events or they'll call in and schedule an appointment. One thing as well on the appointment-based approach is when we held mass vaccination events, especially for our elder population, they're having to sit in their vehicles for numerous of hours before they get the vaccine. Now they could just take 30 to 45 minutes out of their day, come here to the hospital and get vaccinated and then go about the rest of their day rather than having an unknown time sitting inside their vehicle. So we really took it from what would be the best approach for the patients. And from the hospital, it helps us save resources as well. So the reason behind the 2 doses is based off of the studies from both Moderna and Pfizer. Their studies show after the first dose, we're sitting around 50% protected. And then when you get the second booster dose, you're sitting around 95% protection against the virus. Again, there's still studies coming out that things could change, but that's the guidance from the EUA, the emergency use authorization that came down from the FDA for us to utilize the vaccines is on a 2-dose approach. That really caused, I don't want to say complications, but a little bit of hurdles, difficulties trying to schedule this in. Unlike the flu vaccine and some of the other ones, it's a one-shot yearly thing. With this, we don't even know if the COVID vaccine is going to be a yearly one as well. The data shows right now that it's only these first 2 doses. So that's what we're going to work with, and that's what we're focusing on right now. And the way the distribution is happening is we get a certain amount allotted to us for our primer doses, which is our first doses. If I give 975 of those primer doses, that whole batch, then I'm guaranteed from IHS that I'm going to get another 975 booster doses. Those are the second doses. So whatever we use for primer is guaranteed what we're going to get for booster. If we start having people come from, let's say they got their primer in Phoenix and they showed up here and wanted to get their booster, you can see what will happen. If we gave that booster to that patient, somebody that got their primer here, their booster shot is now gone because we gave it to somebody else. Granted, we are getting shipments on a weekly basis, but we want to be really careful as to not run out of primers and not run out of boosters. So that's why it's really important for individuals to return back to the place that they got their primer to get their booster shots. There are going to be some case-by-case scenarios where things come up where we might be able to accommodate some people, but for the most part, in general, for the way that the vaccine is being rolled out, it's best that the patient returns back to the first place where they got their primer shot.
I just wanted to speak to the fact of the importance of getting the second dose, also known as the booster dose. Overall, it enhances your protection against the virus. We really are encouraging people to get the booster or second dose. There are some side effects that could occur and they're totally normal. Essentially, what the side effects are indicating is that your body's working to build up immunity against the virus. So even though the side effects aren't very pleasant, and they could include headache, fever, chills, they don't last very long. Typically, it lasts 24 to 48 hours. It's alleviated by Tylenol, Motrin, some of those over-the-counter medications that can help you through that. There will be soreness at the site. Again, that's just typically what people encounter when they have a vaccine injected into their arm. So I just want to encourage everyone to educate those family members and those community members that it is very important to get the booster COVID vaccine.
So I want to speak a little bit about the complexity on the day of these events that are happening. It's not just walking up and getting your vaccine and giving it to somebody. There's a whole bunch of math that needs to take place behind the scenes and getting it ready before you're even ready to put it in a patient's arm. Both Moderna and Pfizer have different storage and handling capabilities. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Pfizer right now. So the Pfizer comes in a 6-dose quantity vial, and it needs to be kept in an ultra cold freezer until we're ready to use that. Once we pull that out of the freezer, if we put it in the fridge and thaw it out, it takes roughly 2 to 3 hours in the fridge to thaw out. Once thawed in the refrigerator, we have 120 hours to use those doses before they expire. However, when we're getting ready to pull it out of the refrigerator and reconstitute it, now we only have 6 hours to use those doses. So if you think about it, and we're having these big events, we're really trying to count how many people are in line or in queue, and then we're having constant communication back to the pharmacy to let them know how many vials they need to pull out, thaw out, and then how many need to be drawn up. Otherwise, there's a potential to have huge waste of the doses, and we don't want to do that at all. So that's why on some of these events, you'll see us looking for additional people as a contingency plan to give the doses to, so that way they don't go to waste. Unlike some of the other vaccines, this is not just, you can't call and say, hey, I just need two doses of the vaccine and it comes over. If I have 2 people, essentially for the Pfizer, then I got to find another 4 people to give the rest of the doses to, otherwise those go to waste. With the Moderna, on the other hand, it's a little bit easier to deal with because we don't have the ultra freeze requirement. However, there's still a timer that once you draw it up, you only have 6 hours to administer it. With the Moderna vial, we have 10 doses. So then we got to find groups of patients in quantities of 10. Otherwise, if we pull up 1, then we got to find 9 more people. So hopefully that sheds a little bit of light on the complexity of it. Especially on these days of the event. We can't just open it from a certain time to a certain time because we might end up with extra doses at the end of that event that could expire. Also, we got to really plan from the very start of the event, how many doses do we need to draw up, and then really look at the time so that way they're not expiring throughout the day when we're doing these events. This is where the complexity happens, and we've been doing a really, really good job working with everybody. Kudos to pharmacy. That team there has been really pivotal in helping us make sure and ensure that we don't run out of any doses.
So there's a lot of pieces that go into or play into giving an individual a COVID vaccine. So starting off, as you're going through the process, you enter patient registration. They check you in. There's a whole process to that I won't go into. And then you arrive at the vaccinator table. So the vaccinator typically is a nurse, a registered nurse, or a medical provider, depending on who is available to assist us that day for mass vaccination events. They ask questions, go through the whole process, identification, et cetera, and then they give the vaccine. The event ends. Oftentimes, we do have to enter documentation on the patient's medical records. Entering all of that. There's also another reporting piece or requirement that pharmacy does. That report is due every 24 hours. We would like to offer these vaccination clinics a very long time, but there's different time requirements that even on the charting side as a provider giving the vaccine has to do. So that includes the charting component, making sure everything's in place for that, and then also reporting back to pharmacy, and then all the other aspects in regards to patient registration. So the paperwork component really is a benefit for the patient. So due to the fact that it's a new vaccine, we really are keeping track of the patients who have received this vaccine. If there's any type of adverse effect, that's documented anywhere and in any medical record or patients noticing something, there is a reporting system the government would like to follow up on and ensure that everything is okay with the patient, really what occurred. So there's a whole reporting system in place for each individual that receives this vaccine. It falls on us as providers in providing this vaccine to ensure that everything's in place for the patient in case their record needs to be called up, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole track finding method or process that we have to ensure for the safety of the patients. So that's why all the paperwork.
To just add something to Leah's comment, with the adverse reactions, we pass out information when we're giving these vaccines that if a patient is feeling any kind of reaction after having the vaccine, they should be going to VAERS. It's a vaccine adverse event reporting application that the government has established. You could download the app onto your phone, and we normally hand out a piece of paper on the day of the event that shows those details. You could either report it through the app on your phone, or you could call your ED department if you report over there and let them know that you're having this reaction. You think it might be because of the vaccine, and then that gets reported to the pharmacist, and then he'll report that up the chain. I'm sure you all are aware that, and you guys are watching the news, there are some other vaccines, some other manufacturers that are getting close to getting their EUAs, their emergency use authorization, through the FDA. So we haven't heard anything concrete yet regarding those vaccines, but we just want to let everybody to remain flexible. We're going to have to continue to adapt and adjust as these changes occur. Constantly from day one of when COVID hit here last year, that's really what we've all been doing. We've all been doing a phenomenal job of adapting and adjusting to the environment as it has changed. So again, thank you all for your patience, and we look forward to serving everybody and continuing to provide this layer of protection for not only our staff, but for their families and friends as well.